Okay, I hope it's recording. So this is my presentation on the theoretical framework and case conceptualization. I hope you're looking at the title page right now. Okay, so for this portion, it's the theoretical framework portion, and I chose attachment theory. So the major contributors to this theory are John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And John Bowlby was the original developer of this theory, and he attempted to study the stress infants experience when they're separated from their parents. So, what he studied was that babies went through great leaps and jumps to not get separated from their parents. And this was seen through the baby crying and clinging to their parents and screaming. And he, in turn, created these four different attachment styles that I'll define later on. And Mary Ainsworth, she specifically studied infant parent attachment. And this was in a strange situation. She created the strange situation lab with her and her students. And in this lab, a 12-month-old baby was brought in with their parents. And the baby would be separated from their parents. And she would analyze the baby's reaction when they were separated and when they were eventually reunited. And in turn, she utilized Bowlby's attachment styles that he defined and characterized each baby with said attachment styles. So, the major concepts and terms for this theory. So, the primary caregivers are the main concept of attachment theory is that the primary caregivers who are responsible for the child allow the baby to develop a sense of security, and the baby knows and understands that the caregiver is dependable and consistent, and this allows the baby to grow and explore new environments. And these are all examples of a secure attachment style, which I will define in 5 seconds. So, defining the styles, as I said, that John Bowlby created. So, first is secure attachment, and secure attachment is when babies show distress initially when the caregiver leaves, but when the caregiver comes back, the baby is easily soothed by the caregiver and calms down and eventually begins to just start playing again. And by when I say start playing again, this was in the strange situation lab. So avoidant attachment style is typically when baby usually avoids their caregivers and they don't really show any preference between the caregiver and a stranger. And again, in the strange situation lab, you could see that the baby would even be willing to play with the stranger. There was no real preference between the two. Disorganized attachment style typically develops when the caregivers consistently fail to meet and respond appropriately to their child's distress. And lastly, anxious attachment style is usually due to inconsistent parenting, and this occurs when the baby is initially fine when the parents are there and playing with them and there, and then the parent leaves, the caregiver leaves, and the baby, extreme distress, crying, screaming, and then the caregiver eventually comes back and tries to soothe the baby, and the baby just does not respond well to that. They are still upset, they can't be soothed, they're still screaming, just like when the caregiver was gone. So that's anxious attachment style. Okay, so the source of problems, and the main source of problems if we were to use the attachment theory if we were to use attachment theory is that the source of problems occur in people's childhood, and this is largely because the child at the time when they were a child did not feel love and secure and confident in their caregiver's relationship, and in turn their behavior as an adult was affected. So if you are a child or a baby who has an insecure attachment style, then in attachment theory, it is almost guaranteed that you will have difficulty creating relationships and holding relationships and friendships in your adult life. So basically, whatever affected you in your childhood, relationship wise with your caregiver, will affect you in the future. So if you have a secure attachment style with you're a caregiver, that's great. And that means that the adult in the future will be able to have these long lasting relationships, but not so with the insecure attachment style if a person was to have insecure attachment style when they were a child. So the solutions to problems is basically to for the insecure attachment style to be create a secure to have the child or adult create a secure attachment style with someone else, and this is typically where the therapist comes in. So because most likely the therapist is the child or adult first secure attachment relationship in their life. So overall, the main goal is just having and creating a secure attachment style with someone else. And this shows the client that it is possible to have these secure relationships in life, which quite possibly they might not have known prior to meeting the therapist or social worker. So, so what should the social worker pay attention to in assessment? So the social worker should figure out first what type of attachment style their client has, whether it be disorganized, avoidant. Just figure out through asking questions what attachment style their patient has and this client has, and this can be shown through like the maladaptive behaviors and whatnot. And then again, I think the most important thing during assessment is finding out about the client's childhood. You need to figure out what type of relationships they had when they were younger with their caregivers, if there were any caregivers, and really dive into that. And it's also very important to find out about the current relationships that the client has with people. So find out if they have any really close families and friends, if they have any long-lasting friendships and relationships currently, and dive into that. Also, I would also think it's important to pay attention in assessment is to focus on how these past experience with their caregivers, if they do have past experiences, good or bad, figure out how it has influenced their current coping mechanisms in their life. So figure out how their current behaviors were influenced by their past with having an insecure attachment style with their caregiver. And overall, the most important thing to pay attention to assessment is asking questions about the client's childhood. So what should social workers do to make change and interventions using this theory? This is slide 8. I hope you're running along with me. So it's imperative that the therapist provide the client with a new secure attachment style relationship. And in some ways, when the client therapist relationship, it's almost serving as a role model for the client that lacked this attachment in childhood, and it's really important that the therapist is empathic and sensitive and kind and sensitive. I said sensitive, but because those are all ideas, not ideas. Those are all values and of secure attachment styles. And again, another important fact and creating change and using interventions with this theory is that the therapist must prove to the client that it's possible for them to, create a secure attachment with people, unlike what their past experiences might suggest. So you're just really showing the client that they can have these relationships with people. It's possible, and people won't always let them down. So it's really important, again, as I said, that the therapist is kind and sensitive and consistent. So goals using this theoretical lens. So again, as I said, the goal is for the client's insecure attachment style to be corrected through a new relationship. And again, this is typically with the therapist. And this relationship is called a corrective experience. And again, it's important to focus on changing the maladaptive behaviors that the client may have created because of these insecure attachment styles in their life, and either get rid of them altogether or try to diminish them slightly with these new secure attachments that the client is creating with the therapist and hopefully other people in their life. It's also, I have to sneeze. It's also really important that the therapist focuses on the client and understands that the client cannot just have that one secure attachment with the therapist. The therapist needs to make note to the client that it's very, very important for the client to find other secure attachments in their life, because the overall goal is, to create this secure attachment style with the therapist and help the client realize that they can create other secure attachment styles and create those other secure attachment styles and then be on their merry way and not see the therapist anymore. So again, as I said, overall the goal of intervention is to correct the insecure attachment style that the client has. Okay, weakness and critiques of this theory. So there are not too many critiques and weaknesses of this theory. It is pretty much renowned in the social work field and the psychology field. People really like it. I do too. But also, attachment theory has a lot of support from a neurological standpoint. So there are not too many critiques, but the one critique that people say about attachment theory is that it fails to recognize influences of gender, ethnicity, and social class. And these factors, which are, again, independent of the caregiver's emotional availability and response to the child's needs, can be significant as the quality of that early attachment style for the child or the baby. So that's the main critique that people have with this theory. So now we're on slide 11, which is case conceptualization. And one second. Okay. Whew. Getting my breath. Okay, so the overview of this case. So basically, I picked out what I thought was very important. I decided to use Jennifer, the 10-year-old Salvadorian girl, as my client. So, as I just said, she's 10 years old, and she currently lives with her parental grandmother. Her mother has not been in her life since she was a couple months old. And both of her parents have a history of substance disorder, violence, and law enforcement involvement. Jennifer stayed with her father after her mother left, and her father is reportedly in and out of the house. He sometimes stays with them. He sometimes stays with his girlfriends in other houses. He is not consistently home. So Jennifer's grandmother is her primary caregiver. And her grandmother, Estelle, has reported that Jennifer is difficult. She's really hyper, and she has stated to workers that nothing works to make Jennifer follow directions. She's also reported that she is really harsh with Jennifer. She loses her temper and yells and cusses at her. And so, talking about Jennifer now, Jennifer is doing poorly at school, and she frequently seems to argue with other girls in her class, but she seems to be generally well liked by her students and her peers. She also goes to the YMCA after school, and workers here describe her as high energy and very intense. So at the end of the case, it's stated that Jennifer and Grandma go to this medical place to get some help with some stuff, and it's stated that Jennifer is really eager to talk with medical staff. She's not shy, she's open, and that she stated to them that she feels that nobody loves her and that she sometimes hates herself because she is always in trouble. Okay. So, important dynamics and issues presented. So I thought the most important issues and dynamics that were presented were that neither of her parents have been in her life. Her mom left when she was a few months old, and her dad has consistently been in and out of her life, which, is never good for a child. And again, I thought something that was important to take away from this case is that her grandmother is frequently angry with her. She doesn't seem to have a lot of patience with Jennifer, and again is known to lose her temper. So in the case, it says that Estelle herself is really overwhelmed with her job and just looking after this young child. So I would argue that unfortunately the grandmother cannot fully care to her grandmother's needs right now. And this in turn has just created this, I would say, disorganized attachment, because she seems to have no real preference between the caregiver, her grandmother, and the workers. She was willingly open to talk to them and get to know them and, tell them about herself. So those were the important dynamics and issues presented. So, sorry. Okay, so source of problems and solutions using attachment theory. So, again, the main problem, as always, with attachment theory is that the client, Jennifer, is not in a secure relationship with her caregiver. She has an insecure attachment style with her primary caregiver, which is her grandmother. And as a result, she, has this, like I said, I would say disorganized attachment style, and has created these, because of the attachment style, she has created these maladaptive behaviors, which is the intensity, difficulty for all directions. And I think it did state that she's really hyper and intense, and I think this is almost her way of trying to just get attention from other people, because she does not have that attention from her grandmother. She has negative attention, but really none of that positive attention that promotes growth and change in a child. And I think she's really looking for that, which is why, again, she's so willing to be boisterous and loud in class, and so willing to talk to the workers, the medical care workers. She just wants that love and attention. And again, as I said, Jennifer hasn't had a dependable caregiver since birth. Her parents have been in and out of the house. Her grandmother, she herself is overwhelmed, so she can't properly care for her granddaughter's needs. So I would say the main solution, again, as always, with attachment theory, is creating a new secure relationship with someone else and changing her insecure attachment style to a secure attachment style with someone else. It's really important that she has this new corrective experience that shows her that she can have a secure relationship with someone, and that not everyone will let her down, and that she is not always an annoyance to people, and that she is loved. So I think for her case, it's imperative that the therapist is overall consistent, because she has not had consistency in her life, and kind, and doesn't lose her temper with her, because her grandmother seems to lose her temper with her a lot. So it's really important that the therapist who's working with her, the social worker, therapist, whatever, has all those qualities. So again, the main solution using this theory the main solutions for this case for Jennifer is to create a new secure attachment with someone, the therapist, and also help her create new secure attachments in her life, because again, it's really important that we don't just have the single client therapist secure attachment. We want them to reach out in other areas of their life. So I think the main goal right now is just creating a new secure attachment with a therapist or social worker. So what should the social worker pay attention to during assessment of this case? So even though Jennifer is in her childhood, she's only 10, it's still important for the therapist, to pay attention to how Jennifer grew up. So what did it look like with her father in and out? How does it look like with her grandmother right now? And we need to focus on the current environment that Jennifer lives in and the relationships that she has with people around her. So, figure out how she possibly feels about her dad being in and out, find out if she has a relationship with him, find out about her relationship with her grandmother. We have some idea what it is. She says she doesn't feel loved and that she hates herself because she's so difficult, and her grandmother, unfortunately, probably due to her reactions, has made Jennifer feel that way. And just examine how these relationships and this insecure attachment that she has with her grandmother has led to Jennifer's current maladaptive behaviors. And there could be more that weren't even stated in the case, so really focus on that. Okay. So what should the social worker do to make change in this case? So again, the social worker with Jennifer needs to create just a really trusting relationship with her. And as I said, it's really important that the social worker or the therapist is patient and sensitive and kind and consistent. I think consistency is key with Jennifer because she has not had consistency in her life. She has not had a consistent relationship that shows her love and dependability, and she hasn't had that and a relationship where she can grow. So I think that's really important for her and the social worker that they need to do in order to make change. As I said, overall, like I said, she hasn't had a consistent patient caregiver all life, so the relationship she has with the social worker should really mirror that. So again, be consistent and patient. And overall, the therapist, like I said, must create a secure attachment with Jennifer, and this will serve as a role model that Jennifer has, lacked since birth, unfortunately. So, goals of intervention and how the social worker would achieve this using attachment theory. So the goal of intervention for Jennifer is just creating a secure attachment style with the therapist, as well as diminishing or getting rid of her maladaptive behaviors created by her insecure attachment style. And how the social worker would achieve this using attachment theory is pretty much what I just said in previous slides, being kind and empathetic and finding out about Jennifer's life and finding out how her current insecure attachment style has affected her, and find out about her relationship with her grandmother and other people in her life. So, concerns using attachment theory to conceptualize this case. So, again, pretty much the only critique I would say that I would say is that it does not address how the financial situation of Jennifer's home life might be affecting her. This can cause a lot of stress, and I understand that Estelle, her grandmother, is under a lot of stress at her job, so this in turn can create a lot of stress on the child. We don't really focus on that in attachment theory. And it also does not address social class, which again could be affecting both Jennifer and her grandmother. We don't know because attachment theory focuses much less on that than the childhood and just finding out about relationships and whatnot. So challenges that may occur when using this intervention with the client. So I think the main challenge for Jennifer's case is that she may be a little resistant to forming a new relationship with someone. I think just, she's so young, and this constant failure to provide has, probably really affected her, and she's scared of forming new relationships. She doesn't want to get let down. She already feels unloved. She doesn't probably want to feel even more unloved and feel like people hate her, and whatnot. So I think she could be quite resistant to that. But it did say she was willing to open up, so that is one positive, that she was willing to talk to these strangers. But there's a difference between, talking about your life and talking about your life and talking about your struggles. So I think that could be difficult. And also due to her current maladaptive behaviors, which is, it said that she's really high strung, she's really intense, energetic, she doesn't listen. It might be difficult for the therapist to, sit her down and, really talk to her about her past and getting to the nitty gritty of her insecure attachments with her caregivers. And that's it. The next page is my reference page. And I hope you liked this presentation. I loved your class, Professor. You are how I would like to be a therapist in the future. So it was such a pleasure. You have no idea how much I learned. And that's it. Now I have to take the camera and maneuver this. Oh.